John, you're doing brilliantly. This is exactly what I was hoping for.
Yeah.
Are you feeling comfortable?
Yeah.
I mean, it is really just a big conversation, that's all it is.
Okay, yeah, I know. That's what you try to.
Isn't it?
But he's photographed.
I know, but you're telling me.
I'm not here.
Yeah, I know. It's hard to say don't ignore
all
him.
right,
But
all
I
right.
mean, you're telling, you know this story forward and backward.
Yeah, I don't know everything.
See, what I like about you is, like, you not only were there, but you can set the scene for why everything was. I mean, that's what people in my generation are missing.
Yeah.
The why
Yeah,
was this
yeah.
whole thing the way it was.
Okay, you can ask some more artillery. Go ahead.
Would you say that critical was often the deciding factor in a battle?
Oh, the artillery definitely was on both sides. I can remember every soldier, every infantry soldier will tell you that the most fearsome thing he faces is artillery coming in. And especially when you can hear it being walked across the landscape. The Germans or us would have a target and they would move it across left to right, and you would hear it come towards you every few seconds, another one. And the anticipation and hearing those whang of the nasty, have you ever seen artillery shards? They're nasty big fragments and they come whirring through the air going whang. And when those explosions walk toward you, you really think the end has come. And by good luck, I guess they walked over me and not on me. But that experience of artillery fire is the most frightening thing, I think, any in combat. And the same thing would have been true for the Germans. Our artillery support was, our artillery caused them pain and anguish too.
Let me rephrase the question. I know there's a lot of things in the mix in any given battle, but what was often the deciding critical factor?
Well, the deciding factor was often the availability of mortar support and machine gun support from your own battalion. Each battalion of 4 companies has one artillery. To start again.
In any given battle, what is the big deciding factor?
One of the deciding factors is clearly the availability of artillery and mortar support. For example, each battalion has one heavy weapons company, and they will send a section of mortars with you, be right behind you or next to you. And when there's a enemy attack coming in, the fact that they can set up and drop mortar shells on top of that attack is often a critical value, critical matter. Then, of course, artillery can be called in. Forward observers will be with you. The artillery doesn't work always behind the lines. They have forward artillery observers with you, and they take great risks because they have binoculars, and the Germans could see, flashing binoculars, so that the casualty rate among the forward artillery observers was very high. But they were very effective in calling in support. Of course, at some time, the deciding factor is the spirit of the men, the fact that your sergeants are able to rally the men and say, let's go. When people are afraid to get up and move across an area that with machine gun bullets, somebody has to get up and say, let's go and try it. And that leadership at the level of a platoon sergeant is crucial. And I guess one of the successes of the 10th was that we had such a marvelous set of staff sergeants who ran squads and platoons. And they were our friends, and they were our mentors, and they were our godfathers that kept us going.
What is that frame of mind that's embedded so deeply in 10th Mountain men, even today, that always forward mentality?
Well,
Or explain the always forward mentality.
well, always forward mentality means that if you allow the enemy to dig in, to stop, dig in, register his artillery, you're going to have a terribly tough battle the next day. If you can hit the enemy when he's just lost his position, when he is tired, when he is binding up his wounded, when he is hungry, if you can hit him then, you're a much better chance of winning. If you wait 2 days, you'll have a much tougher battle. Army commanders know this. I often think of the Civil War, with Lincoln frustrated at his commanders would stop and rest just when they should go forward. And I remember in our dash across the Po Po Valley, which was an exciting feature with everybody going forth in German trucks and American trucks, pell-mell across the Po Valley. I remember thinking General Hayes has learned that lesson. He's pushing us forward even though we're tired, and it's better to do it this way than to wait until they dig in and defend. So that's the always forward mentality, and our leadership had a clear grasp of that.
So would you say the 10th really subscribed to the always forward motto?
I think so. I think we...
What can I have you state as the
Yeah,
start?
it's a matter of pride, you know, like our football team, let's go forward. But deeper than that, we knew that that was the way to minimize casualties.
Can I just have you say the word always forward in a complete sentence?
Okay.
Would you say that the 10th subscribed to the always forward mentality?
We subscribe to the always forward mentality, in part, I suppose, because of the football team spirit of let's go forward. But basically, we understood that by attacking the enemy when they were not ready was the way to minimize our casualties.
By the time the Germans had lost Riva Ridge, what had they really lost? It was more than just that piece of real estate. They lost the ability to...
Okay, go ahead. Say it again.
By the time the Germans had lost Riva Ridge, they had just lost more than that real estate. They lost, what had they lost the ability to do?
Well, they lost the ability to defend the Mount Belvedere Ridge. And it's time to talk about the Mount Belvedere Ridge. It's not just Mount Belvedere itself that's important, but it's a long ridge that extends up northeast. And the mountain at the end of that ridge, called Mount Della Terracia, was really the key objective. That route, Mount Della Terracia, overlooks the route north from there. And whoever commands Mount Della Terracia commanded the route north. And so the Germans' most ferocious battle on Mount Belvedere was the battle for Mount Della Terracia. They offered a huge artillery concentrations and very bitter battle. Most of our casualties in the Mount Belvedere campaign occurred not on Mount Belvedere or Mount Gorgolesco, but in the country the 86th took, up on Mount Della Terracia. Once the Germans lost that, then the way was we could go move up in the next offensive, which we call the March Offensive. Starting on March 3rd, we could move from there up to Mount Della Spey, and then forward. But without Mount Della Terracia, that would not have been possible. So by losing Riva Ridge, they lost the ability to defend Mount Della Terracia, and therefore gave us the opportunity to move north in the route that we did.
How long and how intense was their resistance at Della Terracia?
It's lasted at least 4 days. I think it wound up on from the 21st to the 25th. Now let me think back. It started on the battle was the 19th. Our attack on...
You can stop that. You want to look at a piece of paper?
No, I just want to...
How long and how intense was the German attack and counterattacks on Mount Della Terracia?
Well, let's work back. The battle for Mount Belvedere itself and Mount Gorgolesco, its twin peak, we really took that position on the morning of the 20th, and we had perhaps 2 days of counterattacks. The attack on Mount Della Terracia started on the 21st and was a huge struggle. It was not cleared until the 25th.
And how intense were the counterattacks and the attacks on it from the German point of view?
Well, say that again.
How intense were the German attacks and the counterattacks during that battle?
Yeah. The Germans, threw their most furious counterattack at Mount Della Terracia. Thousands of rounds came in a short period, huge artillery bombardments, and our troops barely were able to withstand that attack, but they did.
Okay. Anything else on that? Okay.
Maybe I should say,
oh.
let's see, that would be, what's it, 86th, 3rd, but I want to name the right battalion that did that.
You talking about Della Terracia?
I'm just trying to think. I want to make sure that's it. It was okay.
bit more about the battle at Della Tracia. What exactly happened there?
Well, it was the Mount Gorgolesco and Mount Belvedere itself were taken on the 20th. It took about 2 days for the counterattacks to die down. But on the 21st, the attack started on Mount Della Tracia, first by the 2nd Battalion, 85th, and concluded by the 3rd Battalion, 86th. And on the 24th, days after the battle started, the Germans threw a huge counterattack with some of the best German soldiers from the Mittenwald Battalion, making an all-out attack with thousands of rounds of artillery coming in, and they expected to take that position. But they were beaten back by 3rd Battalion, 86th, and barely beaten back, and that was the decisive battle that then determined the future of the campaign.
What was it about the topography of Della Tracia and the tree burst situation that was sort of a factor that affected soldiers there?
Yeah. Well, I wasn't there, so I can't be absolutely sure, but it's a confusing terrain. If you drive up there, walk around there, there are little hills and hummocks and valleys, a complex terrain that's very hard to follow, even if you have a detailed map. And that was a factor. They had, as usual, made very good use of that terrain, hiding soldiers in little, tucking them in little valleys in the terrain. So it was a very tough battle, and but the men were determined, and they beat back the counterattack, and that was the end of the German thrust on the Mount Belvedere Ridge.
There's something interesting. You can pause for a second. I was tramping around there with, ready when you are.
Speed.
Anything else you want to say about that, or otherwise I'll move on to March.
Okay, let's move on.
Move on to March. Just talk a little bit about what was the goal of the March consolidation. What did they need to accomplish?
Well, after having captured the Mount Belvedere Ridge, the next objective was to move forward to take a ring of hills around Casteldiano, about 10 miles northeast. And the objective there was to get in position to move into the Samoggia River Valley. Let's start this again.
Okay.
Let's see. What the question was again?
What was the goal of the March consolidation?
Just call it the March Offensive.
Oh, March Offensive.
Well, after the March Offensive, we fooled around getting ready for the Spring Offensive. Just say
that's
March.
Consolidation. Okay.
Yeah, do it
well,
again.
Tell me what the goal was of the March Offensive.
After having taken Mount Belvedere and Mount Della Tracia, the next objective was a line of hills around the town of Casteldiano, maybe 6 or 7 miles northeast. That was the next objective because from there, General Truscott believed that we would then be able to move into the Samoggia River Valley, which would be an easier place where armor could operate and get us into the Po Valley. So the objective was a ring of hills around the town of Casteldiano, including Mount Della Spey, which was a key point. So the March objective went up. The March objective, can you cut that?
Yeah, we can get that out. Just start with the March
Yeah,
Offensive.
the March objective, no, the objective of the March campaign was to take that line of hills. And the objective of that campaign was to take that line of hills.
You know, on paper, it probably seemed like this will be no problem. What was it like?
Let's see. Okay, go ahead. Start again. Say it again.
On paper, the March Offensive might have seemed like no big deal. You've certainly knocked off some mountains that were a lot smaller than that. Why was it difficult?
Well, there was a series of small mountains in a complex terrain, and we had trouble right away. On the very first day, the sad event occurred at near the little town of Iola. The famous ski trooper Torger Tokel was killed there, and many others were killed in fighting for small towns and small villages from there all the way up to Mount Della Spey. And then the attack on Mount Della Spey occurred on March 5th by my battalion, the 1st Battalion, 85th, and that was no picnic. But it proved to be, in my case, a lucky thing for me to have been in that battle because having participated in the battle for Mount Della Tracia, let's go back.
You want to pick it up with having
Yeah.
participated?
What's that?
Having participated in the battle.
Having participated in the battle for Mount Spey, it was another battalion's turn to take the next step on March 14th.
April 14th?
Let's go back.
I'm just a stickler for
Yeah.
details.
I know, my mind just goes.
So having participated in Spey,
Yeah. So having participated in the battle for Mount Spey, it was our turn on the next round to be in reserve. And that next round happened to be the April 14th offensive, the spring offensive. And April 14th and 15th were the bloodiest days of the intense history when troops jumped off from Mount Spey and on a series of hills just to the north of Castigliano. Hills like Hill 909, 913, Rocca del Rufino, the town of Torre Iusi. Very bloody battles that in 2 days we lost huge casualties. And by having participated in another battle the day before, I lucked out and was not on that offensive, but many people I knew were. And that was really a bloody attack.
why were they so bloody?
Well, again, the Germans knew we were coming. We had been preparing for 2 weeks. It was very clear that supplies were being brought in, and the Germans knew exactly what we were going to do, and they were lying in wait for us. The theory that the bombardment of the first day by U.S. Air Forces and by artillery was a furious bombardment that lasted more than an hour. Everyone thought that would finish the Germans, but when we went forward, when my colleagues went forward, we soon discovered that the Germans had just hunkered down and were ready for us, and they had every aiming point ready. They had mortars and artillery. There were minefields spread everywhere, and it was a very tough offensive, no surprise.
Why was air support so valuable?
Why was who support?
Air support. Talk about the value of air support.
Okay,
Now, in
well,
that particular situation, you
I
thought...
covered that earlier.
Well, that was artillery.
Oh yeah, well, okay.
I mean, air support you think of as a nice thing to have, but in some cases, air support is the thing that makes it possible
well,
to do more.
Every soldier will remember the fact that when the U.S. Air Force was in the air, the German artillery shut up. So that was only unfortunately when the Air Force went away, the artillery had come back up. But yes, the effect of Air Force.
We can start air force. Let's start air support all over.
Yeah, every soldier will tell you that he remembered let's start again.
What's the value of air support?
The main value, in my mind, is that air support kept the German artillery quiet. I remember many times when, as long as there was an American Air Force plane in the air, the German artillery was quiet. But once the plane would leave, the artillery would be up and at it again. So that the effect of the Air Force on the artillery was the main thing, in my view, that they were doing.
Is air support valuable?
Very valuable.
Okay, you say it.
Air support was very valuable.
I can say it any day of the week. It's much better when you say it.
Yeah, you're good.
Well, that's the thing. Nobody thinks about, these are players that are out there, and it's what makes it possible to go forward.
Yeah, but you're going to scramble all these words around and make them come out better. I mean,
Well, air support is valuable.
yeah.
If you
I mean, when you edit this,
well, let's put it this way. If you had had no air support, would you have jumped off of Dallas Bay?
Well, if I've been ordered to, yes.
But let's put it this way. After you saw the bombardment of air support, okay, in April, what did you think? You thought...
Well, if I had been ordered to participate in that attack, I would have been comforted by seeing that bombardment, and I'm sure it had some effect. But the sad fact is that the Germans dug in, and, I'm not sure what we're doing here.
Well, I'm just thinking, air support might have given, 10th soldiers the confidence to say, hey, we can go forward.
Yeah.
I mean...
I think that's probably true. It may have been a false confidence, but they got it.
Well, what happened once they did jump off?
Yeah. Well, ask the question again. Okay.
Oh, are we back on air support?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Air support, what did it make? What did air support make possible for soldiers to do?
Well, air support, in my view, is primarily valuable in keeping the German artillery quiet. I remember very clearly whenever there was an American airplane in the skies above us, the German artillery was quiet. As soon as the plane would leave, they would open up again. So that is one importance of airport. The other, Air Force.
That's one.
Yeah, that is one important role that the Air Force plays. Another one, of course, is bombarding the enemy. As on the April 14th offensive, there was a huge bombardment by artillery and Air Force. Our Air Force, which bombed the hills north of Mount Dulles Bay. And that was one of the features which I suppose enabled my comrades who were jumping off to go forward. They had seen that huge bombardment and they had the psychological confidence that the enemy was dead. It turned out not to be true, but that confidence must have been an important factor in allowing our attack to go forward.
You know, once I got over there this last February and we walked every hill, top and bottom, I mean, I really understood how steep it was and how open it was. Once they jump off of Dulles Bay, they're in a very wide open
Yeah,
field.
you go right across
It's
like that.
very
Yeah,
exposed.
yeah.
I mean, maybe you could just talk a little bit about, you know, once the jump off occurs, they're not protected anymore.
Yeah. Well, the attack on April 14th on those hills, Hill 909, Hill 913, Rocca di Rufino, the troops that made that attack jumped off from the north slope of Mount Dulles Bay. And once you come off Mount Dulles Bay and go across the valley, you're in the open. And there were minefields around. It was a very difficult attack, a very difficult, dangerous place to be.
One thing I understood is that there were some funnels. I don't know if they're natural funnels, but, you know, you would come through fields and there would be natural places where it would be easy for the Germans to zero in on you.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
You know who had mentioned it to me was Parker.
Oh, he's probably got it right.
Yeah, it was, one thing that amazed me is how open it was. There's like no place to run, no place to hide.
Yeah.
You're in the open.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah,
no place. Okay, is there anything else, but I know we kind of got off on March quickly, but is there anything, if you had to summarize what the difficulties were of the March offensive and the consolidation?
Well, maybe I'll get the casualty figures here, too.
Oh, okay. I mean, part of March consolidation was straightening out the lines, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was just sort of, you're sitting in position, patrols and getting resupplied and taking vacations. I mean, there was nothing done.
Vacations.
Well, you know, we went, you know, what people went to Rome
Right.
and pass.
Right, and people rotating in and out. I see, that was nice of them to let everybody take a vacation in March. Some people are tired of the mud.
Okay.
You seem pretty straightforward. Are we on March? You wanted to add about the March offensive in terms
Well,
of difficulties?
what
of it?
about that business about the openness? Then?
Oh, we're back to that, okay.
Yeah.
Once you jump off of Dulles Bay, describe for me what the terrain is and what kind of problems it presented.
Well, once you jump off from Mount Dulles Bay, you go downhill into a valley, and then you're in the open, and there really is no place to hide. So it was a very difficult attack, very bloody. The first 3 days of the spring offensive, we lost about 300 killed in action and 1,000 wounded in 3 days. So it was a very bloody attack before the breakout occurred when the 87th took the little town of Tola, about 5 miles north, and that put us in the terrain that went downhill to the Po Valley. And General Truscott was able to bring up the 1st Armored Division, go down our left flank. So our success in that drive depended upon getting into the Samoggia River Valley, and that was the purpose of the...
I think it's for rain. I'll stop. You know, after Tole and people were getting towards the Samoggia River Valley, why was that valley critical for the Americans in terms of, what was it depriving the Germans of?
Well, the importance of taking the town of Tola was that put us in a position to move into the Samoggia River Valley, which for the first time would be a terrain of gently rolling slopes going downhill of the Po Valley. It was a terrain in which you could operate tanks. Tanks do not operate well in the mountains. It's too easy to knock them off. So as soon as the 87th took the town of Tola, General Truscott realized his objective was achieved. He then moved his 1st Armored Division, which had been on our right, over to the 10th left, and they went down the Samoggia River Valley on our left. We went down the middle, and up Route 64 went the 85th Infantry Division, and that was the key to the breakout, those 3 divisions moving forward, the 10th in the middle, 1st Armored on our left, the 85th Infantry Division on our right, and that's how we moved forward rapidly. And on April 20th, 6 days after the offensive started, we were in the Po Valley.
You know, why did the Germans want so desperately not only to hang on to the mountains and block the Allies, but what value was the whole Po River Valley to them in terms of, you know, feeding the breadbasket of their and the industrial complex?
Yeah, well, the Po Valley was and I guess is the breadbasket of Italy, and their main industry is there. So the Germans made heavy use of the agricultural and manufacturing resources of the Po Valley.
Would you say that the Po River Valley helped sustain their armies in Central Europe?
Oh, certainly.
Please do.
Oh.
Please, go ahead.
I guess so. Okay, yeah. So certainly the German army was sustained in Italy to a considerable extent by food and materials manufactured in the Po Valley.
Okay, that's good. Hey, I have one more question about Gorgolesca before we move on down the line here. Were you there when Hugh Evans sustained the actions that earned him a Silver Star?
Yes. Actually, I didn't see it, but I was nearby. I didn't actually observe it. We were separated a little bit. But I was close enough by. What do you want to say? Did he describe it?
Oh, yeah. And we went there and he described it.
Yeah, I think that's all you need.
Okay.
Because my memories are that was my first big combat. My memories sort of blanked out. So all I really know about it is what I read. If I tell you about it, I'm just telling you what Hugh told me.
Your memories really blanked out about big things?
About that, most of that attack is the first. It's very blurry. From then on, I have kind of even though I've gone back and refreshed my memory by being there, that Belvedere attack is still very blurry in my memory. It must have been the first shock to me, and then I got used to it, and so my memory is pretty clear from then on.
Why do you think you have a little bit of shock to it?
I don't want to discuss this. I mean, I don't.
Okay. I want to just pick off real briefly at Torre Aiusi, okay? Torre Aiusi is a medieval. Is it a village? I'm not sure what you'd call it.
Well, Torre Aiusi is a small village just north of Castigliano, situated tucked in the mountains, Hill 903 to one side, and there's roads that go through it in a complex way. It's a small village with several dozen houses, and it was easily defensible by the Germans, and it was one of the bloody battles that the 87th faced in moving north from Mount Della-Spey.
What was it about Torre Aiusi that made it tough to clear?
Well, if you see that picture, I mean, say.
Oh, I didn't bring that book downstairs.
Or will you be able to show that picture at the same time?
Oh, yeah, and we shot at Torre Aiusi. But because it wasn't a hill or a mountain and it wasn't steep, was it because it was?
Well,
it
it's a tangle of roads and hills. Okay.
Yeah.
Torre Aiusi was a difficult objective because it's a small village of perhaps a dozen houses situated on curving roads in a tangle of hills and tiny roads that are very difficult to attack. If you look at this photograph here showing this town. No.
You know, and it's not a hill that you go up. It's not urban warfare, but it's.
Start again, let's say.
Well, what were the difficulties of taking Torrejusi?
Torrejusi was a difficult objective. It's only a small village, perhaps a dozen houses, but they're situated on a twisting network of roads with hills looking down upon them, and easily defensible terrain, as you can see from this photograph of that.
And well, in some ways, was the 10th out of its element? It was suddenly in fighting more house to house as opposed to uphill.
No, it wasn't. It was still in the mountains. You're fighting in roads.
But it's an urban environment, wouldn't you say?
Well, it's not. It's not really urban.
Right. It's not urban the way we think of it.
You have isolated villages that were isolated houses that were easily defensible and with good lines of fire. Will you be able to show that picture?
Yeah. Oh no.
Yeah.
And actually, I have some. We went into Torrejusi, and there's like bullets in buildings and window frames and stuff.
Yeah.
We shot all pictures of them.
What's that place called? Bacca dei Revari. Bacca dei Revari. Okay, let's try again.
That just rolls right off your tongue, doesn't it? Why was Torrejusi difficult to clear?
It was a difficult objective because it's a tangle of hills, small hills, roads, and a tangle between them. Isolated houses that have sweeping lines of fire from them. Look at this photograph, for example, of Bacca dei Revari. Very hard to attack, very easy to defend. And so the 10th, particularly the 87th Regiment, took very heavily casualties in taking Torrejusi. You
know, by that time, it's month 3, I guess, technically, that 10th had been in battle. The 10th knew there's no more surprises. You know, they had lost the surprise advantage. How did that wear on you guys, knowing that?
Did I think about that at the time? I don't know. Okay, ask the question.
By the 3rd month of battle, you'd lost the advantage of surprise. And how did that affect what you were thinking at the time about?
Yeah. I'm sure it must have affected it. We knew that the Germans were aware of what we're doing. I don't think it's a very good, interesting point. Let's forget it.
Okay. You know, one other thing I realized I forgot to ask you before I leave the River Ridge thing. The 10th had developed and tested and trained with some specialized equipment. The equipment we had talked about earlier from Rainier and also the Hale days. When they actually got over to Riva and Belvedere, I know not all of that stuff made it. Can you talk about what happened that year?
Okay. You going to ask it, or you did?
Oh, that was it.
Okay. Well, the ironic thing is that all that specialized gear we had, very little of it got over. The skis that were used on our ski patrols were Italian skis, and we had very few sleeping bags. I never saw a sleeping bag in Italy. I used regular blankets, and so none of that special equipment really got over. We were using, we had mountain boots.
Yeah, you had those big clunky things, didn't you?
Yeah.
Those were clompers.
Yeah, I thought we had mountain boots that were good.
So that made it. Well, where was all the gear, the missing gear?
I have no idea.
Probably still there today.
Probably in Army Navy stores.
Yeah. We can buy for $1.
Okay, that's all. That's all I really know about.
No, that's plenty. That's plenty. You know, I meant to ask you about Riva Ridge. Was the climb made in secret?
In what?
Was the climb for Riva Ridge made in secret?
Yeah. Okay, that's your question. Yes, one of the remarkable things about that attack was that 5 companies of the 86th hid out on small villages at the base of that ridge. Any person in those villages could have given the secret away to the Germans. They didn't. The troops stayed indoors. None of the Italians gave us away, and it was a complete surprise the next morning when our troops arrived at or near the summit of the ridge. So it was a secret attack, and it's a great tribute to the relationships we had with our Italian hosts.
And that's a relationship that still
Yeah.
exists to this
And
day.
that's a relationship which still exists. I remember going out on patrol with local Italian partisans going with us to help us see the way. They were with us all the way. In one rather unusual encounter, before the battle started, this was late in January, in the area of a wonderful town with a wonderful name of Montefigatesi. One of the officers had a brilliant idea of, let me go back.
Okay.
Which reminds me of an interesting incident from my own military career. We were based near the little town of Montefigatesi, and every day our company would send out patrols into a no man's land. And someone had the idea that we would make a clever move forward by leaving off one or two people every day in a town that the patrol went through, and the Germans wouldn't count. And gradually we actually did that. It turned out that my friend Ralph Perry and I, he was the senior PFC, were left off one night in a town, and we were fed and clothed and housed by Italian partisans. So, and my friend Ralph Perry was the American commander of this little village, being the senior PFC. And every day, two others would join us. And so we were fed and housed by Italian partisans in this remote little village of Torriglio. And when I go back there, I walk around town and shake hands with some friends and have a wonderful reunion.
Seems like home in a way.
Seems like home. It seems like home.
Do you ever run into people there that you remember from then?
Yes. They will not remember me by name, but they will remember that there was an American soldier here. And I will say, I am that man, and they will embrace me. So
Isn't that
it's
touching?
one of the delightful things about the trips we take back to Italy, is to meet the Italian people who were there then and who remember us.
It's so touching. And then second and third generation, they know the stories.
Yeah. When their school kids sing God Bless America, there's not a dry eye in the house.
Isn't it amazing how well their second and third generation kids know it?
Yeah. It is amazing.
Oh, we're doing our part.
It's amazing how well the second and third generation of Italians know the story of the American liberators. One of the things that keeps it green in their memory is that every little Italian village has a cemetery, and they will find colored photographs of people that the Germans shot, and they have not forgotten this. They viewed us as liberators, and without their help, we would have had a much more difficult time. They're wonderful people, and it's a joy to visit them every 3 years.
Well, I can't wait to go back. Well, I can't wait to go back with you. Well, after Toriausi, how about if we talk a little bit about something that's a little bit unusual, the Cavalry Charge.
You know, geez.
What do you know
I know
about
the
the
story.
Cavalry
I know the
Charge?
story that's repeated in Soldiers on Skis by Dan Kennerly, and I've tried to reconstruct the evidence. The people who were there are dead or gone.
Well, I
and
interviewed two of them.
well, let me finish what I'm saying.
okay.
That I've looked at the morning reports, and I can find almost no casualties that were attributed. There's something exaggerated about Kennerly's story. And it makes a wonderful story of the last cavalry charge. I've never been able to really substantiate, and I can't find any casualties they say horses were killed. So I'm really uncomfortable with the whole story. I think it's partly Dan Kennerly's. You've met people who were
Don
there?
Hubbard out of New York and Jack, I can't think of his last name, but he's out of
Okay.
Texas. I met him,
What do they say about it?
it was horses.
Yeah.
Yeah. They were in it. They
so
were
the-
horse people to begin
They were horse
with.
people, so
Yeah, they
but
were
I've
horse
never
people.
found any human casualties.
Don Hubbard gave you some pictures.
So I don't really.
Know that much about it?
It's third hand. We might
okay.
get it from Hubbard.
Um, At Torrey, at Rocca Ruffino, the 10th.
Rocca di Ruffino, yeah.
Rocca di Ruffino, the 10th, there was a breach, in a way.
A bridge?
A breach. I mean, think about the 10th.
Yeah, there. I read since that it was the boundary between two different German units, and
Right.
that helped. I don't know. I can look up what they
You
were.
want to pause and look at your notes, Whip? Edge?
They went. The attack unit. Don't film this.
Oh,
the,
okay.
the attack unit, I know, was at a boundary between two different units, and that helped. I can look it up here and see what that was. I wasn't sure it was
what
right.
amazed me is after everything they went through,
What was that?
after everything the 10th went through, okay, and you get up to Rocca di Ruffino, that is a big mountain.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is a steep mountain.
Yeah, it's a
And-
tough one.
And it's all right in front of you. And you look at it, it's like Devil's Tower in Wyoming.
Yeah.
That is a big hunk of
Yeah.
rock in front of you.
That we have a nice battle photograph taken then and now of that in that book.
I'm telling you, if I pulled up to that thing, what would,
Yeah. Well, let's say, what was significant about the battle?
what was significant about Rocca di Ruffino and what happened there?
Well, the battle for Rocca di Ruffino proved to be a crucial development in the campaign. The 2nd Battalion 86 took Rocca di Ruffino, which was a tough battle. But unknown to them, that was a boundary between two German divisions. And by attacking Rocca di Ruffino and farther north, they were actually going between two enemy units. And that gap was difficult for them to fill. They rushed in reinforcements, but it was too late. And that was the real turning point of this part of the campaign.
Because it was between two divisions, that is a big mountain. The Germans have the high ground again. We're at the bottom looking up.
Yeah. They're talking about going north from there. I don't know exactly where the boundary. You're pushing knowledge. I've got that phrase. I don't
know
have
how
a
you
map.
got
I
it.
don't have a map of those two German
But
divisions. I don't know.
when you go over there and you look at Rocca di Ruffino,
Yeah. Well, let's look at the map. Let's look at
and
the
we're
map.
at the bottom and they're at the top.
Right.
How do you
So
take? How do you take Rocca di Ruffino?
Well, they climbed up. They climbed. I mean, it was a matter of fact, there was a General Hayes observed that.
You want to pause? What is Rocca di Ruffino, and what did the 10th do about it?
Well, Rocca di Ruffino is a formidable mountain that was one of the German strong points that was trying to hold our attack back. The 86th took Rocca di Ruffino. They scaled and took it. Actually, General Truscott observed them doing so. Once they had done that and moved forward from Rocca di Ruffino, it turned out that unknown to the 10th, that was the boundary between two different German divisions. And by moving forth there, the Germans had a hard time resisting. They sent in reinforcements, but it was too late. And so that proved to be a critical element in the campaign, the capture of Rocca di Ruffino and the move north from there by the 86th.
Now, at this point, the tide is shifting a little bit. It's turning a little bit. And the Germans aren't just falling back. Would you say that they're running? I mean, they're shooting.
No, I wouldn't say they were running. I mean, just
What
talking
are
to
they
you as a
doing?
person.
Well, let's put it this way. After this, what's the state of the German command? Are they in chaos?
The Germans were never really in chaos, except
But it's
maybe
not
except
going-
maybe when they got into Po Valley. I mean, they tried to brush in. They tried to send in reinforcements and failed. Because the thing is that what makes me nervous is that if you read the battle, everybody says, I call this the breakthrough. And it is true it began, but the next couple of days, there were furious battles all over the place. The Germans were holding up. Just to simplify it.
Well, let's put it this way. The Germans weren't giving up.
Oh, no. And
Then why didn't you tell
there
us
were
that?
furious battles in a dozen places where companies had heavy casualties.
So the 10th had caused a breach, but the Germans weren't
The
giving
Germans were not collapsed. They didn't really collapse until we got into the Po Valley.
up. Okay, well, how about if you just start by saying, yeah, there's a breach, but they weren't giving up.
Okay, what's the question?
After Rocca di Ruffino, were the Germans giving up?
They were not giving up by a long shot. They were being driven back, but they were well organized in a dozen different hills and towns from then into the Po Valley. they fought furiously, and we still had many casualties before we actually got into the Po Valley.
So the battles were far from over.
The battles were far from over, but we were moving forward, and they were unable to stop us.
Did at different points, the Germans' resistance would stiffen up and then give a little bit and stiffen up. How would you characterize the flow at this point?
Don't know enough to say.
Okay.
Forget it.
Well, let's see. At what point here do you want to talk a little bit about what was amazing about the breakout?
Let's see.
What was remarkable about the 10th March across the Po Valley? I mean, here's what do you want to hear what I think was amazing?
Yeah.
80 miles. I thought it was 5 days.
Well, we started on the 20th. What do you mean? We want to get all the way across the Po River, or?
Well, okay. Where's the beginning and end of this?
Well, let's say
you did 80 miles.
How many miles is it from the fooled around there a while, and it was.
I mean, what was remarkable about the march across the breakout?
You're talking about the breakout, which is out of the mountains into the Po Valley and across. We call it's a breakout on the 20th we broke out into the Po Valley. What was remarkable about it is just that it was a landmark achievement on the way to the end of the war by getting into the Po Valley. Then the Germans had a hard time. They couldn't resist us with armor.
What were the Germans doing then?
Let's say about this. I was just thinking out loud. The Germans were then planning to get across the Po Valley and get out and get back up into Austria.
Did the Germans really have a good exit strategy there?
I don't know.
Well, let's put it this way. Were they very organized about this retreat?
Less organized here than any other place. There was a great confusion. I mean, they would, for example, a German aircraft landed at Villafranca Airport after we captured it. They didn't realize that, so they were disorganized. So from the Po Valley on, their defense was disorganized.
Seemed like they didn't really plan on retreating, did they?
Pardon me?
They didn't really plan on retreating.
On what?
Retreating.
Well, that's not really true either. I've read that, they, and I quote some of it in that new booklet, they were planning, they had a planned retreat, just that we rushed them.
What was their planned retreat?
Just to go back and get everything across the river, take ferries across the river and get out.
Where were they going to go?
Back up to Germany and Austria, up the Alps.
Well, tell me about this. What were they going to be doing there?
Well, I'm uncomfortable because I don't really know the details. They were clearly headed up to the Brenner Pass and back home. That's all I know. And there's a lot of discussion about what they would have done. And since they never got that far, they were stopped on the way. I haven't read the German record. I don't really know what their plan was. All I know is what happened is that their organization broke apart about the time we got to the Po River. By that time, they were confused, and they had difficulty in command. And
Okay.
So where are we? Maybe we're finished.
I think we had. What was remarkable about crossing the Po River? The fact that you guys beat the boats.
Well, I know.
But
everybody knows this stuff.
Before we get off across the march, I mean, to me, I thought it was remarkable that you guys covered that much terrain that quick.
Yeah.
Was that remarkable or not? I mean,
It was.
Okay, well, I'm going to let you say it.
Are we talking about going across the whole Po Valley?
What was remarkable?
I would say let's talk about going into the Po Valley from there on the 20th until we cross the Po River.
Okay.
Let's say that would be how many days later? 20, 21, 22. 3 days later, we crossed the Po River. Then there was a halt while we had to get stuff across the river, and we fooled around there for 2 days.
So
well,
what was
another
remarkable?
division went ahead of us. Actually, the 85th got up there to Verona first, but they don't like to talk about that. Hayes was a little too cautious. He waited for heavy tanks to get across.
Well, was it remarkable that you guys covered those 80 miles so quickly?
Yeah, now what 80 miles, is it how many miles is it from?
Well, you had sent me an email that said that you know, by the time the 10th hit the Po Valley, what was remarkable?
It was remarkable, the fact in the next 7 days, I'll tell you again.
Okay.
What was remarkable was that during the next 7 days, we got all the way across the Po Valley, marching 80 miles in 7 days up to Lake Garda. That was a remarkable achievement. And on the way, of course, on the 23rd, 3 days after starting across the Po Valley, the 87th crossed the river under fire, and the rest of the division was across by the next morning. So that was a remarkable achievement. And you've read descriptions, I'm sure, of how Hayes arranged matters. We leapfrogged. One battalion would move in the lead. Others would follow by trucks. One battalion resting, one battalion moving, one battalion fighting its way across. And it was a sleepless time. And to go across the entire Po Valley in 7 days against opposition was a remarkable achievement. And it was done by using all sorts of transportation, German staff cars, horses, trucks, jeeps, anything available, commandeered vehicles. And the word was just get a vehicle and go. So it was a remarkable achievement.
Because you were moving so fast, what happened by the time you got to the Po River?
Well, by the time we got to the Po River, the Germans, I think for the first time, were really disorganized. There are all sorts of stories of German planes landing at airports that were already taken by the Americans, other stories of Germans not knowing where they were going. It was the first time that I think we got the sense that the German army was confused, and that was the beginning of the end for them.
Now, you got there ahead of the boats. Didn't the 10th Mountain get there ahead of any transportation across the river?
Oh yeah, they want that story? Somebody must have told that story.
You didn't. I've only talked to 100
I just
of
get
you
sort
guys.
of tired of these stories. It's well told in my book at Hamilton. Let's see. Actually, okay, ask the question again.
Well, because the 10th was moving so quickly across the Po Valley, what happened by the time they reached the Po?
Well, the plan of the High Command was for the 85th Infantry Division to cross the Po first. They were operating on our right. But General Hayes was determined that his troops were going to cross first. And when we hit the Po River first on the evening of the 22nd of April, he said to his engineers, get me some boats and we'll go across. And the famous story is that the engineers went back and uncovered some boats that were intended for the 85th Division. And they said, we can lead you to the river. And they led this party up and got away with the boats that were actually given to the 87th Regiment, not the 85th Division. And so, somewhat illegally, General Hayes got his boats, and the next morning, by noon the next day on the 23rd, the 1st Battalion of the 87th went across the river under fire, paddling across, 10 men to a boat, and that was an exciting accomplishment.
You know, explain how the Po River...
I don't like that exciting accomplishment.
Well, right, that's okay. I have a letter from somebody who was in a boat, the first boat.
Okay, all right.
Okay, no worries.
Because I was all third hand.
No, I got a letter from the platoon leader.
Yeah.
No worries. Explain how the Po River is a major river that transects. It's like a natural barrier. You know, this was the Germans could be on the far side of it and easily take pot shots. The Po River is a major barrier.
Yeah. The Po River is a substantial barrier. It's a large river, and to cross that river in paddle boats while the enemy is firing at you from the far bank is not an easy task.
And you know, I should add that, you know, as disorganized as the Germans might have been, they're still shooting behind them, right?
Oh yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah. Well, the Germans may have been disorganized, but they were not completely disorganized, and they had effective artillery. Well, let's say, think about it, they were using anti-aircraft guns.
well, let me ask you this way, so you keep it fresh. What were the Germans doing to slow the Allies down?
Just the main well, the only thing I know was that they were they were shooting anti-aircraft guns. They were using artillery and anti-aircraft guns to stop their assault.
I mean, they were disorganized, but they were shooting behind them, weren't they?
Pardon me?
I mean, they were disorganized, but they were shooting as they went.
Yeah.
They weren't
Well,
giving
what's the last thing we were talking about?
Well, we were talking about that they might have been disorganized and
disorganized,
confused,
okay,
but they were
Okay.
certainly putting up resistance.
Okay. Well, the Germans may have been disorganized, but not completely so, because they were able to mount an effective artillery and anti-aircraft barrage to try and slow down or stop the 87th Regiment's crossing of the Po. And so they were fighting, and they weren't completely disorganized.
You know,
And that's very weak. I don't.
No, I know what you're trying to say, though. In some ways, were they trying to buy themselves time for the rest of them to get away? People in the rear, the German rear, trying to buy just a little more time for people ahead of them to get ahead.
Well, they're always doing that. It's just that we're guessing about their motives, and I'm uncomfortable with that.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, to me, that's strategy that or is it just how it played out? Were they organized?
Well, they were disorganized. There is one story, which is not, we don't know for sure, that the German general actually swam across the river. Tom Brooks found that. I don't think I'm doing very well now.
On the Po? No, I think you're doing good.
I mean,
well, we can move on. That's fine.
Just get out of this.
You know what I think is interesting, though? To us, the Po is a river, and to many people, the Po is a river.
Yeah.
But it's what people don't realize is how much natural features, like a river or a mountain or something,
Oh, they must know that.
is an automatic, no, it's like an automatic defense point.
Yeah.
Because whoever is on the far bank can hold
Well,
self.
that's a good one. I see you're assuming that somebody wouldn't automatically know that.
They might not. But maybe you could just talk about how the Po is, a natural feature, natural,
Okay.
or it could be it's something that's held to the advantage.
Okay. All right. Well, the Po River was, of course, a natural defense point for the German attempt to hold us back. To cross a river under fire in small boats with someone shooting at you from the opposite bank is not an easy task. So they were doing their best to slow us down.
Are you very open when you're crossing a river? I'm good, aren't I?
Yeah, the answer is obvious.
Right.
I refuse to answer.
But I mean, people don't think about that. They just think, I'll cross the river. I mean, you're in a situation.
Well, I said when somebody is shooting at you, yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to add on the Po?
One of the things that puzzled me is I'm not quite sure why the casualties were, if you actually count the number of casualties going across, they were not very many. I could find out the actual crossing of the Po. So people talk about it as if it was a huge event. My statistics show it was done at very low cost. I'm surprised at how it could have been so low. I don't really understand it. I wasn't there, and I've never read an explanation. I don't want to say.
Got it.
I don't want to make it easier. So that's why I'm
Right.
holding
Oh,
back.
I see.
know
No, that's okay.
I know too
That's okay.
much.
Well, I was just trying to get perspective on. It's not like walking across a bridge.
Yeah, I think.
Because there was no bridge.
Yeah, there was
Right.
no- yeah. Well, the bridge had been. Well, I can say. There had been a pontoon bridge that went across, but the Germans had been using a pontoon bridge to retreat across it, and before they got there, just before they arrived, they blew it up. I could add that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Of course, the Germans were retreating and doing their best to get back home, up into the Alps, and they had a pontoon bridge that went across the Po River at almost the place that we crossed. But before we arrived, of course, they naturally blew that bridge up to make it harder for us to go across. Actually, it was one soldier of the 87th actually went across that bridge as a prisoner of war and got away on the other bank and was, in a sense, the first American soldier to cross the Po River. I have his name here if you want it.